So Annette, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show today. I was really excited to have you since once I discovered your work and I discovered your book, and we'll
I'm
talk more
always
about
happy
that
to
later.
talk story.
So I'm thrilled to have you. So before we get started, I want to ask you something that I ask everybody that comes on the show is really, can you introduce yourself in your words and tell us a little bit about your story on how you got to where you are today, and then how did you get to be doing what you're doing?
I was a strange child. So my parents divorced. Daddy was a social worker. He didn't know what to do with me after school and in between going to grandmother's house. So he would bring me these workbooks. He introduced me to rational emotive therapy, transactional analysis. This was the 70s. I learned transcendental meditation. And
Oh,
so my whole world
wow.
was framed by looking for patterns.
Mm,
And I really love psychology. Dad didn't want me to study psychology, wanted me to go to law school, so I moved to Australia. So that was an education. And while I was there, I had a marketing degree, which put me in a position where it looked like I was something special. I'm from Shreveport, Louisiana, right? So they put me in export at Ericsson Telecommunications, J. Walter Thompson's. I'm working on the Ford business. And after a while, it became obvious that I was more interested in the group dynamics.
mm, mhm.
These people can't decide what to have on a pizza, much less how to do a campaign. And so that's when I went back to school. I studied adult ed and psych. Not really training and development because that's a different sort of education.
Mhm.
And then I started teaching leadership under my mentor, Jim Farr. And so we would teach self awareness workshops for leaders starting in the early 90s. And he also trained me how to do research. And so a lot of the good clients went to the old white guys. And I went to Oxford, North Carolina to work in the tobacco factory. And so it thought, I'm good at research. Let me just do some research about what I think is going on. Because I would say, they excluded me and they'd say, oh, no, no, you don't. That's not what happened. I'm like, yeah, it is. So the first book I did was I asked people to tell me stories, tell me a story about a turf war. And they would continue the metaphor because turf war is a metaphor. They would say, well, the guy stabbed me in the back. And I'm like, well, actually, that's not literally true. What happened?
Right. Yeah.
And so they told me the stories of what happened. They stood up to make a presentation, and this guy turned and started another conversation over on the side. That would be shunning or strategic noncompliance. So I named the 10 games. And American Management Association decided to
Wow.
publish my book. And it was the member gift
Oh,
for that year. Of course, territorial games, I understood how people uh, keep you out. And then I thought, well, it's because they don't understand the big picture. So then I wrote a book called A Safe Place for Dangerous Truth. And I
wow.
figured out a way to get everybody to, kind of self-regulate and tell the truth in a room. And, before the end of it, when you go into the bathroom, check for feet and say, well, that was a big waste of time. How about we just use this time to tell the truth? Well, it turns out people are very good at it. They know what they feel, but in order to tell their truth, they really needed to tell the story of
Mm,
how they came to the conclusions. At the time, I had been facilitating this intense dialogue and then began to add story training to it. And the ability to self regulate, create a safe place, and to tell a story is enough for a group who thinks that each other are idiots learn to say, oh my God, I had no idea. And so instead of fighting, they actually stitch their stories together. And then we end up with bigger pictures. And then drinking from a different well, I've decided to ask women to tell me their story about power.
mm.
And it turns out that there are some gender differences in what we believe power is and how it should be used.
Wow. So there's so much there, right? So I mean, but it's all there's one theme that there's a thread with it all, right? It's about stories.
Yeah.
So what's so powerful about stories?
In a way, to study story is to study religion. Story is evolution's way of keeping us collaborative in spite of the fact that we're competing over limited resources. Story is learning who you belong to and who belongs to you. Story is, what does honor mean? What does integrity mean? You can say, integrity, but unless you have a story about the last time it actually cost you something, I'm not sure you know what integrity is. Finding stories, and that's just half of it, is the best way to introspect and see what are my patterns, what are my values, and what do I keep repeating? The good stuff and also the bad stuff. Storytelling is, of course, the best way to influence someone. People don't care about your facts. They don't want any more of your damn information. They got too much to deal with right now. But what they need and what they crave in you is faith. And that is faith that you were here for the right reasons and faith that you're a good person. And so you can't walk in and say, hi, my name is Annette and I'm trustworthy. Unless they have a personal experience of you actually being trustworthy. Experience is the best teacher. Story, which is to take them into a scene where it would have been easier for you to, not do as much of an integrity job as you could, then it is almost as good as a personal experience. So I say experience is best, but story is second best.
Yeah. And it's amazing, amazing, Annette. And I know you know this of how people bond and they look at each other like, wow, I had no idea. And it builds trust
It's
like
unbelievable.
nothing else. I mean, I'll be totally candid of how I found your book. So I love storytelling, right? I espouse storytelling. I do that in some of my sessions, but I'm always talking about other people. And as I've been doing things and I've been getting some feedback, people said to me, Janet, you've got these brilliant um, platforms, et cetera, that you're doing, but we don't know anything about you. Why aren't you talking about yourself? And I was always thinking, well, because I'm doing this in service of other people, it's not about me, but people want to know you. And
That's how to be of service.
right. And I talk to a lot of leaders who tell me the same thing. They say, I don't want my ego. I don't want them to think I'm so full of myself that it's all about me. What would you say to that? Because
That's so
that,
funny because
yeah.
I have them come up with the who I am, why I'm here story. So I think there's 6 kinds of stories. And the first story people want to know is who are you and why are you here? The 4 buckets are time you shined, a time when it would have been easier not to do the right thing, but you did the right thing.
Mhm.
A time you blew it, and in a way where you thought, I will never let that happen again.
Right. We all blow it. So it
We
can't
all
be you
blow
always
it, and
shine.
people
Right.
love the blew it stories.
Right. Failure.
Yeah, you get double points for those because you're
Yeah.
being vulnerable and you're also modeling vulnerability. So if
Right.
you want more honesty from them, and mentor stories, somebody in our lives taught us the most important lessons that we've learned. And to tell about that mentor is to tell about the lesson, but also to give gratitude and credibility to the person who taught us. And so for me, that's modeling gratitude. And then the last one is a book or a movie. You can just lift a scene from a book because it's an artist. I don't believe in telling untrue stories unless it is a piece of art that has already reached a pinnacle of being a book or a movie. All stories, personal stories, need to be true. So when I have them come up with this who I am, why I'm here story, I say, okay, write down the 4 qualities or 3, it doesn't matter. I'm just trying to get them thinking that you bring to the table that if you weren't in this room, nobody would have that. What advantages, what qualities do you bring? And so I give them about a minute, a minute and a half, and you see these people that have their pens like poised, and so I always say, well, if you can't think of anything, just write down humility. But
That's great.
people need to hear the time you shine.
What?
How else are we going to spread our wisdom? Or, how else are we going to save them from making mistakes? If we don't tell the time when it was really hard to keep my mouth shut, but I did. I'm glad I did. The thing is, it's also a good story. It was really hard to speak up, but I did. And so as I talk to people about storytelling, one of the things I love about story is one of the few ways we can communicate in a way that encompasses paradox,
Hmm.
that
Yes.
could show a time when I was both firm and flexible,
Yeah.
depending on the circumstance. And so
And that
I
we are
am
both,
absolutely,
that we have the
and
polarity. It's not one or the other.
it's
Yeah.
paradox.
Yeah.
And storytelling encompasses the both and, without us being labeled as wishy-washy. So one of my pet peeves is that people who think leadership is about always being firm and disciplined and doing it consistently the same every time. Well, consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. Consistency, by definition, is actually a lack of empathy.
Mm.
And so when we use story brings these paradoxes in. The reality of it being both, universal, we want everybody treated the same, and specificity. We want to be able to take care of some people who need, special care.
Mhm.
And so that's what one of the things I love about story is it helps people bring those paradoxes into play without taking sides.
When you're telling stories, there's a vulnerability involved in that. How would you advise people to overcome that or think about that differently so that they can unleash that full power of storytelling?
I think vulnerability is actually the same word as dignity
Mm.
in many ways. And so when I frame vulnerability as dignity, it helps reframe, you know, you're not bragging on yourself. You are sharing of yourself in a way that costs you some risk. And if you want other people to risk by telling you the truth, then you need to go first.
Right.
You can't connect within vulnerability.
Yeah. Okay, so we've established the importance of storytelling. So storytelling is important. Telling stories are important. How does one go about if they're sitting there thinking, oh, so as a leader, what stories can I tell? And how is that relevant to my organization and leading my
Yeah.
organization?
I have two answers to that. One is that the skill you want to learn at the same time you're learning storytelling is story finding.
Mm.
Not many people are teaching story finding out there. Whenever I'm going to work with a group, I interview 4 or 5 people who are going to be in that room, and I just ask them to tell me what it's like to work there.
Mm.
And sometimes they tell me their story confidentially, and sometimes I get permission to share that story as long as it's anonymous. And when I stand up and I share their story through my words first, oh my gosh, I get so much credit for caring in the first place. And if this is me talking about them, I may as well start with their story. The second thing is that I think that you have 6 stories that you need to know how to tell. And this is based on getting a group to work together.
Mm.
I'm not, if I could figure out a way to cut people's heads open and shove stuff in, I would have taught that a long time ago. It
And
doesn't work.
that's what a lot of people try to do, right? And
I
there's not a
know.
lot of room in there.
And just think, how do we react when somebody does it to us? And a lot of people give advice about firm language. It has to be, decisive, and I will do this in 6 months. I've found that provisional language actually works better. So in 6 months, my plan is to have this done. It is less bullying way to speak. And so I think you need to know how to tell your who I am story. You need to know how to tell your why I'm here story, because a lot of times people think you're there for your own reason. Actually, all the time. If you if you're going into a room, you're asking somebody for time or money, they're like, "What are you getting out of
Yeah,
it?"
exactly.
So it may as well tell them up front, and bring them on as an ally. So a vision story. A lot of times we don't know exactly how to tell everybody to get there all at the same time, 100 different people, and they wouldn't want to be micromanaged anyway. But if we paint a vision with a story about where it is we want to go, then people can, there's my greyhound. She wants to go outside.
Oh, how cute.
So it's time for walkies almost. So the vision story allows them to put the pieces together in the middle. It's another way to show a lot of respect. A value and action story, like I was talking about, integrity doesn't mean anything unless it's cost you money or time recently. So tell a story about that. And then they really understand what you mean by the value. A teaching story, which is a lot of times, what I was talking about, experience is the best teacher, story is second best. If you can initiate the sensory memory, the body's memory, instead of just the intellect's memory, that's what story does. And so you're actually putting information in, not just to the mind, but the body and the heart. And when the message connects those three, then you've got a lot more engagement. And then finally, the I know what you're thinking story, which we kind of touched on before. So if I walk into a room and a bunch of these tough guys, are like, oh God, we're going to storytelling.
Right.
I say, what I'd like everybody to do is first we want to all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And then they get that I'm joking. And it's like, I know their objections,
Right.
and I can tell a little story or do something funny. One time I worked with a group, and I'd heard that their last facilitator had used chimes for the break, and the facilitator was so irritating that they kidnapped her chimes and left ransom notes. And so I started out saying, I will not be using chimes. So that's the I know what you're thinking story. And also I teach the 3-minute story. Nobody has time for, that's a whole, the storytelling, professional storytelling, that's a whole different world.
Right.
We have time for about a 3-minute story. The good news is that if it's not working, it'll be over soon. And the bad news about story is that it will never work 100% of the time. And so teaching people that it only works about 50 to 70% of the time stops them from using it, having it not work once, and then throwing it in the trash can.
Right. And not using it ever again.
You
Just like
don't
with anything
know,
else, right?
right? You don't know whether this person forgot to put the carafe under the coffee this morning and had to clean it up on hands and knees. There's context. And so when we take context in, it only works about 50 to 70% of the time. So I lower people's expectations. And then immediately get them to start sharing stories. Most recently, I've asked people to tell a story about power. And so with this last book, I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how powerful are you? Give me a number, which is hilarious because people are like, well, a lot of guys are like 9, but whatever.
I'm surprised it's not 10.
Yeah, well, and so what it does is it launches the mind into what I like to call re-ambiguating. Because some of the things are so certain, we actually need to re-ambiguate what they mean. And if you think you know what power means, it's possible it's because of all the books you've read about power. And one of the things that I noticed is that when I ask people to tell me true stories about the last time they were powerful, it doesn't match what the books say. It flows along someone who is more collaborative. They're going to be sharing information, and and if somebody's competitive, they're going to be withholding information and exploiting an opportunity because it was a secret. So there are 2 different kinds of behaviors that we would call powerful. And I'm not trashing the competitive narrative. I'm just saying nobody needs me to help that. It's well entrenched. What we're losing touch with is the collaborative narrative.
So let me ask you this. In your mind, so you do this for a living, right? So you talk about all of this. Who is a model of a person who does this very well?
I think singer-songwriters are fabulous storytellers. And um, uh, John Prine, Johnny Cash, Bob Dylan. So storytellers as an art. I think that Obama did a really good job telling the story. They were very specific about paying attention to that on purpose. I will have to say that if we're going to look at storytelling versus results, competitive narratives can weaponize storytelling.
Mm.
And so there are people who are weaponizing disinformation right now, in a way that generates disdain and anger and fear. And those are really fast emotions. Unfortunately, on the internet, those emotions are so fast, they look like response rate.
Mm.
And so they get interpreted, this is a successful, clip. I'm not so sure. Love, gratitude, generosity, those are emotions too, but they're not as fast.
Mm. Good point.
And so telling these stories keeps these emotions alive. And if we don't keep them alive in ourselves, for instance, hope, then we can't keep it alive in other people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's almost as if the way you describe that, there's a contagion to the story because they're emotional, right? And so there's a story to connect, but there's also a story to connect in a way that is contagious that could have negative implications. I mean, that's what I'm hearing.
You get to choose. And I know that I've talked to some women who in the C-suite positions felt powerless
Wow.
because they were powerless to do the right thing,
Mm.
and they left.
Mm.
And so if you want more women in your management team, then understanding that this collaborative narrative is based on generosity, gratitude, and love. Um, uh, and so when we pay attention, how many times today have I helped someone feel these three things? Then you can track what it is you're creating out there. And it's so hard because the only time our staff sees us is when we're like, what in the hell did you just do? You know, we only seek them out when there's a problem. And so it takes discipline and one of the things I love about using story as a staff process, even if one person tells a story per staff meeting, about what is good customer service, you know. And you can pull that from a grandmother with a grandchild, you can pull that from a restaurant, or you can pull that from a negotiation. And the thing is that even if you pulled it from the negotiation, it probably would apply to the grandma, and these universal truths. Um, I think of truth as big T or little t. Little t are facts. Big T truths are the truths that were true before you and I were born, and they're going to be true long after we're gone.
Mm.
And they almost always have something to do with paradox.
Okay.
Love is both wonderful and awful.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and what you're talking about right now is bigger, right? It's consciousness, it's the human condition. And I think what we're trying to do in our feeble ways is bring stories to illustrate some of those paradoxes and to connect to them. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and that's exactly what I hear from you.
Yeah.
I could talk to you all day, Annette. And so I know we're running out of time. I have a couple more questions for you, and then we'll wrap up. You mentioned Johnny Cash. Well, what about Taylor Swift?
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh,
Talking about a
I
storyteller,
am such
right?
a Swiftie. I'm such a
Right.
Swiftie. Yes, yes, yes. Taylor Swift is a force of nature. And so she's not just a storyteller, but she, in terms of behavioral science, you look at how she creates that level of emotion and dedication and good feelings. I studied that in grad school.
Yeah,
Because if you think about a social movement, the union movements,
yeah,
you can use the ideas that Taylor Swift is doing. There's little rituals that she has. I
yeah.
mean, rituals, stories, uh, routines. Oh my God, she's got it covered. So yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. I mean, I just when
All
you
about Tay Tay.
stories, I mean, all her songs are stories, right? And they're connecting stories of heartbreak or this experience, that experience.
And about finding your own power.
Thank you.
Shake it off, baby.
I love it. I love it. So, uh, in all of this, uh, last couple things, what would you tell people that are afraid of being vulnerable? That's the one question. So I'll give you that one first.
Okay. When you're afraid of being vulnerable, that's rational. Because when you come up with a story, it's a baby story. It's too soon to prune. You don't want criticism. And it needs to grow towards the light. So you find a safe person who can listen to your story and you teach them. And I mean, stick to it. I want to hear what you like about the story, the sensory detail that makes your story feel real, and the impact your story would have on other people. Only positive reinforcements. Because I've seen people destroy a story just by saying, well, I didn't think,
Yeah.
and so that's all they can focus on.
Right.
So
And
you
it's
tell it with a
technique and it's not even a real story anymore. The emotion goes out of it. Right.
So you tell it with a safe teller, and ideally get them to tell you a story of that's similar, a time when.
Right.
Um, and once you hear it come out of your mouth, and once you see what it does to that person, once you see that they get that story, you won't be able to stop yourself from telling it.
It's so true.
Yeah.
True. What other words of wisdom would you leave on this topic that we've been talking about today with this audience?
Tell the truth.
Mm, wow.
It's amazing how telling the truth can break the ice.
Yeah.
If you're nervous, say I'm nervous.
Mm.
If you care deeply, let them know how deeply you care.
Wow. That human connection, right? That's how we connect. When someone has to
That's how
start.
we live. That's how we
and,
survive.
and someone has to start.
Yeah. Go first.
Thank you. I really appreciate your wisdom today. I think this is going to be an incredible episode, and I'm really looking forward to people looking you up. The links will be in the episode, and they can find all of your amazing work. So thank you very much.
Thank you. This has been so much fun. Thanks.